Oh boy, here we are, kids, in the Philosopher's Den after a saga. And when I say a saga, let me just say what we've been through here. So, recorded throughout the end times, starting in the middle of December of 2014, we, as the group of philosophers, recorded 25 episodes of the lengthy diatribe of the end times. And it was glorious at times, it was draggy at others, but after 1,800 plus minutes, which, if you're doing the math in your head, is a little over 30 hours of content that we recorded, guys, we are now here to sort of share our final thoughts of it all. And here it is. So, before we get into it as a group between Keith and Vince and I do want to just give a shout out to the community, which has been a topic of conversation amongst the YouTubers lately and amongst Warhammer fans. And I want to say to a few names of folks that have regularly commented on these videos and watched them and put their input back at us and that sort of thing. And so I'm just going to run off a few names here of guys that have been throughout. MC1 Gamer, Goldman's Welt, Thomas Mertens, The Peacemaker, Doom and Darkness, Blue Meat, Phantom King, and Ross Figure Painting have been some of the most active ones. And then there's one other name that's been relatively active as well, which I'm going to try to get my tongue around. This was Alexander Milosavljevic. And I may have got that wrong, but thank you to you guys, amongst others of you that have commented and watched throughout this long journey of ours. So, speaking of long journeys, Vince and Keith, now that we're here, maybe Vince, since you've been at it since the beginning from me, how do you feel now that we're here after 30 hours of recording?
Oh, kind of sad, honestly. I mean, certainly it's great that we're at the end of the road, but I've got a little Boys to Men playing in my head. It's although we've come to the end of the road. It's been a heck of a journey. I mean, I really can't think of any other thing like this. I've played a lot of games. I started RPGs in '89. I started CCGs in '94 and War Games in '98. And I can't think of a single other game I've played across that spectrum that has done something on this scale, this scope, to this level of support, with this complex of a story. And certainly there are things I wish we could have gone into more depth on, or that they could have gone into more depth on. But I mean, really, I'm honestly pretty grateful and amazed at what we got, and I think it's just been absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. And Keith, how about you? After joining us for the first time with the Glockin books, so 4/5 of it, what's your feelings now that we're here?
Yeah, it's kind of strange. I mean, it's a little bit sad to be done. One of the things is that it was a weekly thing for me. Like, we would sit down and we would do this on every Thursday, and the following week I would then read up on the next chapter. Like, I did all of the end time books as we were recording. I did it chapter to chapter whenever we were recording. Very rarely did I get very far ahead. And so it became really part of my routine, right? Like, we'd podcast, and then I would have a week to read the next chapter or however many pages, and then we'd go again. And it's kind of been strange over the last 2 weeks that, aside from a little bit of thinking and reflecting and prepping for this tonight's episode, haven't been reading End Times, which is strange. I mean, it's a big break from normality, I guess, at this point, because we've been going for, I don't know, 5-6 months. So yeah, a little sad to see it done.
Yeah. So are you saying that you're missing your forced reading regimen?
Yeah, my homework. Yeah. Well, it's just that little extra weekly injection of Warhammer,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly has its value. And so Vince, has that also led you to read many other things in the meantime?
I don't read fantasy. That's the most hilarious part about it. Like, other than this is seriously the most fantasy I have read in probably a decade. And I loved it because there's something more relatable about it. And certainly it's not that the story was perfect, but because it's touching on this game that I love and spend so much of my life doing and participating in, it just immediately resonated more. So, now all I've been reading is just rumors for what's coming next. That's what's filled up my reading schedule. And hey, I'm just saying, looks like we're going to get a heck of a story going forward. I don't want to jump ahead of anything, but I'm just saying stuff. You tell me.
Yeah, I know what you're getting at. Well, let's sort of set the tone here, and let's sort of bring this into a broader thing. We said this at the outset about what this encompasses, that Warhammer and Games Workshop have been at it for a long time, right? 25 plus years, 30 years actually, that they've been doing Warhammer itself in various different incarnations. So, of course, along those 30 years, they have built up all kinds of storyline, all kinds of characters. Armies have come and gone. Nations have been struck down and reborn, but not to the extent that they have in this tale. So along the way, we have gotten accustomed to characters, we've gotten accustomed to the norms of a particular race, and all of these things sort of came all crashing down throughout the end times. Now, obviously, lots of characters came and went here, so let's sort of start off a bit of a roundtable discussion with a few questions and a series of things that we can discuss. And on the line of characters, I might put it out there to you guys this way. So in reading through those 5 books, which character do you think that you identified with the most, and why is that? Can I throw it to you first, Vince?
Sure, I have a definite answer. Okay, and this should come as no surprise to our loyal viewers, but that is Vlad von Karstein. Okay, for being originally basically a second-rate D-list Dracula knockoff, right? I mean, that's even his name. He was given such a depth of character, and he was, even though he is an inhuman monster, as it were, he was such a human, relatable character throughout this story. He had highs and lows. He had loss and sacrifice, and he had an amazing journey that he went on, culminating in an absolutely fantastic and worthy end. So, yeah, I mean, if Vlad was on the page, I was definitely excited about what I was reading. And I identify with him myself because I've often felt a bit like an amoral, gray person who, in his heart, maybe wants to do a little bit of good, but he's just not willing to commit. So I think I have a personal connection to Vlad in that way.
Keith, what's your quick take on Vlad?
He's a pretty cool guy. I mean, he's a little too grandiose, I think, for me to relate to. I mean, he's all about these giant gestures where he's going to sally forth and, he's going to take his Elector Countship back and he's going to save Isabella and things like that. He's a pretty epic character for being, as Vince put it, a B-rated knockoff of Dracula. So you got to hand to the guy. I mean, in the end, he wanted a lot of stuff and he went out and got it for the most part.
Yeah, I kind of view him as a bit of a dreamer, which is odd, again, coming from an undead character, to sort of tie that in. He has these really strong bonds to Isabella and to his home country that you wouldn't think would be associated with a guy who is typically evil. So it's sort of an oxymoron in a little bit of a way. But for the most part, he held true to it, and his character was strong. So that's a fine choice. How about you, Keith? What would you say is the one you identified with the most?
I'm going to go with a slightly more minor character, and I think it's got to be Dr. Festus. I just love what that guy's doing. He was skulking around the ruins of Altdorf in his little laboratory in the sewers and just cooking up all the good stuff. I mean, he was totally key and instrumental in the entire invasion of the Empire, but he was happy enough just working away behind the scenes. He had his little nerdlings, and Kugoth would pop in to say hello every once in a while. And then in the end, he got to burst forth and ascend to demonhood and, enjoy the fruits of his labors there for a little while before he got turned into a tree.
Yeah, who turned him into a tree, huh?
I believe it was his own doing.
Oh, okay. I seem to remember another person being instrumental in that story.
There was an arm attached to a branch, but really it was the life magic that he had created and funneled into Altdorf, which, caused it.
I get it. Sure.
Yeah, I like Festus. I like the comic relief characters. I like how he was, like I said, behind the scenes, instrumental in the fall of Altdorf, but still light and fun.
Yeah. Good. You got any thoughts on Mr. Doctor? Sorry, I was going to call him Mr. Festus, but Dr. Festus.
Yeah, exactly.
Thoughts to add on him, Vince?
Yes, he didn't attend Nerdle Medical School for 3 years to be called Mister. Sure. I mean, he's absolutely great. He's certainly some of the most fun in the Glotkin book. Again, it's hilarious to me. And we mentioned it at the time that the Glotkin, maybe the story of it is not the best overall out of the the whole 5 books. But there were so many fun moments in that book. It might have been the funniest and most lighthearted book, which is hilarious as an offset to the fact that it's about the fall of the capital, of the center of the human world, the death of the emperor, the end of Bretonia and their line of kings, and just there's just so much darkness. But I think that's what makes that book actually work in the end, is that it's played against these lighthearted moments,
Yeah, in a way, a lot of that book feels like it's just ignorant children who don't know any better playing around in various piles of poop that are out in the pasture, right? And the silliness and the fun that they have with that. And Dr. Festus seems to be the most comfortable of all in doing that kind of stuff, and just enjoying the joy of whatever that brings. So I like him too. He's a good choice.
That's right.
That was also the first of our 2 times that we had like a big monster person pick up someone threatening and throw them a couple leagues, which I'm always a fan of that. More of that mechanic, I believe, should enter the tabletop. More throwing people randomly around. My favorite little minor vampire.
Hurling that vampire out into the sea.
Yes, just the most ignoble end for that effect, sort of vampire there. Well, not really end. He did come back, but end of that moment in his story.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they're glad that vampire could swim and got back out of that. Good. Well, I think my choice, and again, viewers that have watched through most of this, I made that pretty obvious early on that the Balthazar Gelt was my guy. That's the guy that I think I identified the most with. And the reasons being that I would stand behind him is he took a lot of risks early, and he legitimately tried to do those for what he thought was the greater good. At the time that he did those things, though, the lines weren't so blurred as they eventually became later on. So he kind of had a character arc that went full circle. So he started out as the Supreme Patriarch of Magics. He was responsible initially for holding off chaos from the borders, but then got caught up, as we learned, with necromancy and was exiled because of that. Ran down the dark path with Vlad and eventually for a time under the camp of Nagash, before eventually duty called again and he found an opportunity to come back into the fold with the Empire and Karl Franz right at its very last moments, and thus was rewarded with to be the incarnate of metal, and marched all the way to the end. I recall going down into the last chapter, it actually stated in one paragraph that Gelt was, of all of the incarnates, the one that still held the most hope at the point where they were going down the final steps into that last chamber with the orb. So that's my guy. That's Gelt. Oh, I think that. Do you guys have anything to add about Gelt? What you thought of him?
I liked his story. I think maybe that mask hurt his peripheral vision, and that ended up getting him in the end. Maybe don't wear that thing all the time. That'd probably help a bit.
Yeah, he went down because Manfred was able to sneak up behind him. Maybe he hadn't been wearing the mask.
Yeah, would have seen it out of the corner of his eye.
If he wasn't wearing such a silly hat, yeah. But you know what? He's honored in death because all of Sigmar's new followers wear the same mask. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah.
It does very much look like his mask, yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, I quite liked actually his affinity with the dwarves. That kind of like the way that him being a wizard, but was able to win over the dwarves in the end, really kind of spoke to how he was redeemed in the end, right? Like if something that the dwarves, who are stoic and noble and good, and something that they think is generally distasteful and mistrustful in magic, but they can come to accept this guy and sacrifice themselves for him. That really, really shows that I think his redemption is complete and he is redeemed.
Mm-hmm.
I think they saw him as a human slayer, right? Like if you look at his arc, and I really mean that. Like if you look at his arc, it's much like the Slayer's path, right? Like a Slayer has some great failing that they then are seeking to atone for through a righteous death, right? And they now throw themselves fully into this new cause. And I think that was much what Gelt did, right? They saw in him that he had this great failing, but was willing to commit himself now completely to his redemption. And I think maybe that's what made them, more accepting of him.
That's a really good point, actually.
Yeah.
They just didn't ask him to dye his hair red. Or orange, I guess.
Okay. Well, let's flip to the other side of the coin then now that we've talked about the guys we identify with. Let's maybe think about characters that maybe you came in, however you want to approach this. I kind of thought of this as characters that coming into the story, I maybe had higher hopes for, and better aspirations for how they would affect the whole end game or the lead up to it or otherwise. So let me pose that question. What sort of character did you have higher hopes for, and why? Keith, you want to take the lead on that one? You got something in mind?
Yeah, well, I'm going to follow on with my Nurgle theme, and I'm going to go with the Glotkin. I was pretty disappointed with how those guys panned out. I mean, they turned up, they rallied the troops, they threw a vampire in the ocean, they assaulted Altdorf, they killed Karl Franz, but then got whooped by Sigmar, and then that was the end of it. And I really thought, you're going to invent these 3 new characters, you're going to base an entire book around them. I thought that they would have stuck around for longer than a book, and maybe they would have gotten more done. Yeah, I mean, they're still kicking, right? Because at some point we revisit the Garden of Nurgle in Kane, and there are 3 jars there, and there's 2, kind of man-sized, and 1 which is Gert-Glot-sized. So they're still, theoretically alive in the realm of chaos. So maybe they'll come back and do something interesting. Maybe I still have some high hopes for them, but yeah, I was a little bit disappointed with those guys. Thought they could have been better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it almost felt like that's when I started to think that the characters were a little bit Games of Thrones-ish, and we talked about this quite a lot once we got into Kane, but also in Glotkin too, where they invent characters to just do one segment of the story and then we're done with them.
Yeah.
Right? So not a peep of them after that. Sort of like the Ned Stark.
I think it's what made Glotkin the weakest story, right? Is that your primary antagonist you had no real connection to, and they dispatched with them just as quick. When you look at the other books, like Archaon, 20 years of history of him being a threat. Thangwall, tons of novels. You know this guy through and through. Kane, obviously you had Tyrion and Malekith and Teclis. I mean, there are. It's hard to find 3 more famous characters that people have more emotional attachment to. And Nagash, right? I mean, like he is what he is. There's been whole previous campaigns around this guy, but then you got to Glotkin, and it was just like, who, why? Like, was there no Nurgle people in the world that were of any value to talk about? I just, it's just a weird choice they made there.
Yeah, you know that the Nurgle has other followers and other characters that they created in the past, and they did appear in Glotkin, right? Like Epidemius was there, Festus was there, Kugoth, Plaguefather. All of those guys could have been the same sort of role that Glotkin did, really, but they invented that guy to, I guess, maybe it was just to sell a model.
I still feel like you could have made a giant Kugoth Plaguefather model, and that would have been fine, or like had a Epidemius 3.0 or whatever. If you can turn Bone Ripper from a Rat Ogre into that thing, then you can do the same with any of those Nurgle guys, especially since Nurgle guys always bulk up.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it was just like it's kind of like Thangwall, right? How the book is named Thangwall, but you only see Thangwall for less than a third of it. It's the same with Glockin. The Glockin get one chapter, and so does Gutrot Spume, and so do the three Magath Lords. And then there's the final chapter, which is the invasion. So they only stick around for 1.5 chapters out of the 4 chapters or 5 chapters, whatever it is. And in those chapters, they don't really do anything. They throw a vampire in the ocean, so they don't kill the vampire. They don't kill Vlad. Otto fails to kill Vlad, and they kind of kill Karl Franz, but then he kind of comes back as Sigmar and is stronger than before. So, yeah.
So, can I read into that you feel that they don't even deserve their demonhood?
Not at all. No. No. I don't know why Papa Nurgle's keeping them around.
Okay, Vince. Who did you think of when this question was posed?
Oh, this was so easy to me. Geils or Geils or however you say his name, the Green Knight, right? Geils de Le Breton. Throw some French syllables in there. Yes. Man, I'm gonna go ahead and just eat crow on this one right now. Like our most loyal of viewers who go back to maybe the first show when we reviewed the preambles to everything, right? And I said, Bretonians, you got nothing to worry about. Geils is back. He, the prophecy was he comes back to light their darkest hour. It's like opening the matrix of leadership and Transformers, and he did nothing. Just nothing. Just not a thing. He wasn't even the guy they chose to focus on. Like, Duke Jared had way more screen time, and, he was fine. I like him. He's okay as a character. But, you're going to bring back Geils, the founder of Bretonia, and then basically not ever mention him again. I mean, for all intents and purposes, right?
Yep. Yeah, he seemed to be, as far as a device in the story, was just a guy to appear to free up Luin Leoncoeur to run away into the Empire.
Right.
Just to be the caretaker of a dying, decaying nation, which we learned later entirely died and decayed, even by the time that we got to the Conclave and Athel-Loren. And we don't know what happened to Gilles, how he buggered that up or what he did wrong, but he certainly didn't save anybody.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
Imagine if you replaced Duke Jared with Geils, and just how much more, groundbreaking and earth-shattering that revelation that Liliath was the Lady of the Lake instead of Duke Jared, right? Just replace Jared with him and then redo the story, and just how much more impressive does it get?
Oh my God, absolutely. You want to talk about earth-shaking. Yeah.
Yeah, it would have just had such a higher impact. I agree. It's a great choice, Vince.
And I know how he dies because it's covered in the novel, in the supporting novel, the 5th book. So I know how he goes down. You don't see him die, but you see him sort of, he goes down fighting, as it were. And it's fine. It's him and Jared and Abarash, and they're all together at Le Maisontal. Basically, they're fighting where it all began. So, I mean, that's great and all. I'm glad that they at least paid them some lip service in the novel, but just what a waste of having that character out the story. Like, Keith, my God, you're right. I hadn't even thought about it really concretely until you said that, but jeez, oh Pete's, man, the emotion of that scene. Like, I founded a nation for you, God, that would have been amazing. Oh, what a whiff. Now I'm even more sad about him. Okay. We should move on to a new guy before I start weeping openly.
I feel that I want to tie in Luin Leoncoeur in there too a little bit. He seemingly died and then came back as a semi-angelic, glowing dude who bled gold blood, right? And then died a second time just as quickly as he reappeared. So that was a little bit of an empty dish as well. And then they chose oddly enough, a new created character who didn't have a book named after him, and Jared lasted throughout, right to nearly the very end. So
yeah,
the weird Bretonia, weird. That's all I gotta
As
say.
usual, we just don't know what to do with Britonia. True in the game, true with the army, true in the story.
Yeah. So my guy that I want to shine the light of disappointment on is for similar reasons to Keith's choice of the Glotkin, and that is that Thangwall had a book named after him, and he was hardly a player. I mean, he'd pop up every once in a while out of a hole, and squeak his way into fooling some other weak-minded Skaven that he was in charge, even though it was the big vermin lord behind him that was calling all the shots. So he was a pawn throughout the whole thing. He, of course, thought he was more because he's Thangwall and he was a delusional, warpstone addict lunatic. He thought he was a big deal, but nowhere through there did he do anything of his own devising that was impressive to anyone, I don't think. And there we have a whole book named after him. Supposedly, despite not doing much, he gets the big reward at the end, or at least they allude to, that he's got a seat on the Council of 13 because somebody else arranged that for him. All right. So that's my big thumbs down. Thangwall. Named a book after you, and what did you give us? Being a pawn.
Nothing. If you're going to pick anybody out of Skaven who was actually like the rock star of it all, you got to pick Ikit Claw. That guy got stuff done. That's all I'm saying. As usual, that's my boy right there. As I've said many times, creator of the first power armor, and he did work and got no reward. That's the life of Ikit Claw. What do you do?
Yeah. Yeah, that guy engineered, well, at least laid the foundations for blowing up the moon. That's pretty epic.
Yeah. Also took down the Black Pyramid, right? That was him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He blew open the gates of Kara Kadrin.
Yep.
And ruined that keep.
Yep. Yeah, this guy was taking out all of the chief bases of operation of the enemies, right? Formulated the plan to destroy the entire Lizardman homeland, took out the central keep of the dwarves, or one of, basically, and took out Nagash's HQ. I mean, this guy's just putting bases up on the side of his armor, just like there's got to be little marks all around of his accomplishments, and he's getting nothing. Getting nothing but his armor pried off of his burnt body by his inept engineers. Poor guy.
So, counter to my point, though, can you guys find anything or think of anything that Thangwall did that was like, oh yeah, that's some good shit, Thangwall. Way to go. Anything?
No. I can't. I mean, I'm sure there's something that's like mildly interesting in there. No. Okay, so he engineered a lot of what was going on in Nuln. There you go. And he did take out that whole quarter of the city. Now the plan was already. He took the plan because it was, and I think he basically formulated it into its final thing to blow out the foundation of a quarter of the city and sink it down into the ground. That was pretty cool. So I'll give him marks for that. Even though, again, I think it was Screech Vermin King who actually told him the plan. You see that in the chapter previous when Screech is like, here's what we're going to do, buddy, and then they cut, and clearly what he did was explain that plan to him. But
right,
still.
that's the impression I got too, is that really just came from Vermin King.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so that's our big failures. Now, Ikit Claw is one of those guys that you left off at, where we don't quite have the end to his story, and there's lots and lots of characters in the Warhammer world, some of which didn't even appear in the storyline of the End Times, or some that only appeared in the first few pages of the prologue of Nagash that they never revisited again. So when you think about a character who we don't know for sure if they died, you know what I mean? Like they didn't get their head lopped off, or they didn't get, trampled over by juggernauts after impaling each other, or some glorious death like that. Who, Vince, do you think you can tell us a story about how they ended in the End Times, or anything about them? Who would you pick?
Oh, this is such a tough one. Because basically there's a suite of characters that that could all fit this bill, right? Like you said, there's a lot of them. And so the two out of the novel, or sorry, out of the main books that never get any kind of resolution. I'm going to cheat. I'm sorry, I can't help myself, and pick two. And that is, they're both Tomb Kings. And that is Cetra and High Queen Colita, right? Neither get, like, any kind of proper resolution. Colita I've always loved just because I love she has such a great story with Neferata, and then that just kind of, like, nothing happens. Like, Manfred's like, I'll give you Neferata, and then the Black Pyramid blows up, and then we just forget that was ever a thing. And so she, like, whatever is happening with her, who knows? And Cetra, oh my god, the greatest setup ever on the final page of Nagash. I wanted to know what happened so bad because Cetra, like, everybody, you can tell all these armies I play at, there's like one or two special characters who I really identify with. And Cetra, that's my boy. Like, my own personal sense of superiority and arrogance just comes out in the King of Kings. And, you know, after this amazing page, you get nothing. Not even a mention, right?
Yeah, I know.
And it kills me. And I know that, like, so I know from the novel what happened to him. What happens to him is he shows up in Middenheim, kills Throg with his big flaming sword, which I love, which is a good end to Throg. And then he just basically, so he points at them and is like, hey, handle this. Those Chaos Gods thought they would make Cetra kneel. Cetra kneels before no one. And he willingly marches into that globe. Like, that's what happens. That big warp globe everybody's, like, afraid of and getting sucked into, he just walks into it and is like, I'm gonna go beat up some Chaos people, so handle this small business. Cetra's gonna go deal with this. Go take it to the Chaos Gods.
Nice.
But still don't know what happened to him in the end. Like, okay, what happened from there? I don't know. But I'll tell you what, I'd read 3 novels about that story.
Okay. Well, and if you want to talk about Colita, then let's think about where we left her being essentially babysat by Neferata at the Black Pyramid, right?
Yep, exactly.
All right. So if you were to tell us the story of Colita from there, where would she go?
I would like to think that she, first of all, I believe she escapes. Okay, that's what happens. Like, she should show up somewhere. She's effectively immortal, right? I mean, she's 3,000 years old. What's a couple more grand? And I would like to think she escapes in some way. And I would like to think she and Neferata bury the hatchet. That's what I think. Like, I think in a movie terms, I'd love to see one of those scenes where the ancient enemies stand next to each other and they're like, it was really good fighting you all this time. Yep, it sure was. I really hated you. I really hated you too. Guess it all doesn't matter anymore. And then just boom. You know, like, that would have...
That would be right at the last moment, hey? Just as the orb is about to swallow the girls up?
Right, yeah, exactly, yes. Something like that, right?
All right. Well, I think if I was to have to choose one, I'm going to go right back to the very beginning of the prologue area, where we had like 2 pages that tell us about the Ogre Kingdoms. And out of this, I'm going to pick Grisha's Goldtooth, who sits around on his fat throne and gets traveled around by just a mob of Noblars. So let's remind everybody where we left off with him was the mountains were erupting. The Maw was getting angry. The sky gods were raining down upon the Ogre Kingdoms. So they just got up and started marching away. Many of them went north into the realm of chaos. Some of them went east. A lot of them came west towards the better part of the old world. And the over-tyrant, Grisha's Goldtooth, who had been sort of in charge of the Ogre Nation from then, was just all up in arms about that. And he waved his scepter at people and he tried to sort of browbeat them into coming back and settling in and not running away. But here's how I imagine the things went. So despite his efforts, the ogre's pissed off anyway. They went in all their directions. And Grisha's now, sitting on his throne, brooding about this, has no minions to command. He has no people to be the tyrant over. So you're nothing but an empty a ruler of an empty nation at that point. So I think that he gets up on his Noblars and he whips them into shape because he can still browbeat them, and he goes marching after the ogres, who, in the meantime, have met up with our pal Grimgor Ironhide, and Ironhide has browbeaten them down so decisively that they are now followers of Grimgor. And then when they bump into Goldtooth and his rabid band of followers, who is probably not anywhere near as much any longer, Grimgor gets into it with Goldtooth, and they have a little bit of a battle of wills, and then Grimgor has enough of that and instead turns out into a battle of axes and greases Goldtooth's belly and spills it out onto the turf, thus maintaining him as the master of the ogres. So that's how I imagine Goldtooth going down.
I like that very much. I think that's, yeah, he's always, Greasus has always been a very funny ogre character. I'm not sure I ever had any great empathy for him as a special character. I always found him kind of flat. But you can't help but love Grimgor Ironhide. I mean, that guy is just fun from top to bottom. And, you know, I just, yeah, if I'm going to take, I want the head of a fighty, bashy race to be a fighty, bashy guy, not a lazy fat dude sitting on a pile of Noblars. So, yeah, I think dying to Grimgor, I support this.
Yeah, and that proves that he is the best, as he must always prove.
He is the best.
Yeah. And I also wanted to make a point of bringing up an ogre character to pay homage to our man Mitiram, who, of course, was with us as the original trio of philosophers and ran through the Nagash book together with him. And I'm sure that he would want to have a story of his own about Mr. Goldtooth. So please, Mitt, if you ever watch this now or in the future, we'd like to hear your story about how Goldtooth met his end. Maybe it'll be a very different story than what I just told.
I suspect that is true.
Yeah. So Keith, how about you in that same vein? What character do you tell us a story?
I would love to tell you a story. So, exterior, nighttime, we're in Lustria. Oxyotl has just dispatched the first of the Black 13, which are skulking around trying to assassinate King's plan. He spends the rest of the night finishing off those guys. Not even a problem. He doesn't actually blink because he doesn't have eyelids, but if he did, wouldn't have batted an eyelid at him. Not a problem. Then the world starts coming to an end, and he's nowhere near a pyramid spaceship. And as these giant meteorites of warp stone start pounding into Lustria, rents in reality begin to open to the warp, and demons come flooding out. But Oxyotl has spent a innumerable number of years in the warp, and he quickly makes his getaway, or else he'd be destroyed when he gets to Lustria. So he goes into the warp, he spends a couple of millennia there, or maybe it's only a couple of days, we don't know, because time doesn't work there. But eventually, he finds another tear, and it's leading back into reality. And where does the tear open? But on the top of the last dwarf keep. And it's the rift that Skarsnik opens up after he's just killed Torgrim. And so Oxyotl hides in the little shadows in the warp, and he waits till all of the other Skavens skitter out, and they start invading the dwarf. So Oxyotl hops out, and then he scurries away. So later on that night, Deathmaster Snitch, after a successful assassination of Thorgrim, he's climbing back down the mountain, and then his whiskers start going berserk. Right? His innate senses is picking something up, and he doesn't know what's going on. So he freezes, stock still, and he waits. And you can tell something's not right, and he just stays there perfectly still for hours and hours on end. And eventually, he figures something was going to happen. It would have happened by now. Time to get down the mountain. So he goes to start climbing back down the mountain again, and he realizes he can't move. So he can't move because Oxyotl has stuck a little poison dart in him, and he's totally paralyzed from the neck down. So he just starts flailing his head wildly, but he's stuck rigidly onto that side of the mountain.
And then what happens? But the little rock that he's resting his foot on begins to shift, and it opens up one eye, and it opens up the other eye, and then it scurries away. And with that, Snitch loses his hold on the side of the mountain and then topples into oblivion. Noxial just scurries away. That's how that goes down.
I feel like that whole story was directed at you, Vince.
I do not support this story. I would just like to say that.
It totally happened. Anytime,
Yeah.
anything is possible. Yeah, that's what he does. He survives, hangs out in the warp, goes and kills Stepmaster Snitch, proving that he is the best.
Wonderful stuff. I like it. Good. Okay, well, let's move on from storyline stuff. Let's kind of reflect a little bit upon the philosophizing that the three of us have done over the past few months together. We've said some very, very deep, insightful things along the way. Surprising even, the great Slan's intellect with what we have shared amongst ourselves. So, what I'd first like to put forth to both of you guys is, what insight do you think that you shared throughout this that you're most proud of, that you were able to share with the YouTube world and the Warhammer lovers out there?
So I have one. If you don't mind going first.
Go ahead.
Okay. So mine is, and I'm not taking personal credit for this. I'm saying, like, this is probably some of all of us, by the way. I really don't know where this thought originated from in the discussions. But in the discussions during Kane, one of the things that came up was the idea that these people, these sort of preeminent characters, right, would become the gods in the next world, just as when we were rereading the story of the Ranadandra, and you get the idea that their gods were simply the heroes of the last time around the wheel, right? And we said, and again, this is not me taking credit, all of us said this to some degree, that when we see the next story, you're going to see the heroes of this one. So, we didn't know it yet, but they would be called the Incarnates or whatever, right? But those people become the sort of gods of the next time around, and that's pretty much exactly what has happened. So I think we were dead on. We read the cues, and I think that was a good insight that we shared there.
Yeah, if I remember that moment right, it was oddly enough it introduced itself with a guy, Arloth, that never ended up to become an incarnate, but the way that the path was leading it was that scene where Liliath and Eldara and Arloth were in that stone circle with the plinths of all the pantheon of elf gods, and he sort of he was compared to Anarion, wasn't he?
Yeah, I believe so.
Arloth was.
Yeah,
and that's who he identified with, and that's kind of where we got that sparked off from. I think if you and I are thinking of the same sort of thing, Vince.
Yeah, I believe so. That sounds as believable as anything else without me going back and watching all the videos. I will agree.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. And how about you, Keith? How do you feel about that?
That's actually, I think, that's my favorite moment in the End Time series. That little scene in the Teclis Tyrion that, he took the Everchild and he kind of set this whole thing up, and then there was Arloth and Liliath there as well. I thought it was great. I thought it set it up. A ton of foreshadowing, which wasn't obvious, but looking back on it now, you're like, oh God, how didn't I see that, this was all going to happen as this way, So I thought that was a great look.
So is that what you would also choose as your moment that you think it was your best offering of insight?
Yeah, it's pretty good. I think the other one that I picked up on was the wording, how the Emperor was never referred to Karl Franz never referred to as Karl Franz after Slotkin. So he died, and then henceforth in the text he was known as the Emperor until it was revealed that he was Sigmar.
Oh yeah, I remember you pointing that out when we were going through Archaon.
Yeah.
Halfway through Archaon, you pointed that out, and that was. I went back and looked after that, and you were spot on. You were exactly right.
I thought it was very clever. That was really well done by the writers.
Yeah, good. Well, if I had to pick out a moment for me where I thought was fairly insightful was all the way back in the Nagash book, where we have an exchange between Teclis and his uncle, and that's all that he refers to him as. And although we didn't go too deep into it at that time, it was, for me anyway, it was relatively easy to identify that uncle was Malekith. And that, of course, led to a lot of conjecture that we had at the time of what is this going to mean for the elf races that have been at odds with one another for millennia. And does this mean that all of the inner workings and the trappings that Teclis is trying to lay down with sacrificing Aliathra and hoping that Nagash gets reborn and captures that wind of magic, is he really, really going to go to the extent of getting into beds, or an alliance with the Dark Elves that they've hated for so long? And that was I think a big insightful moment that me and Mitt and Vince discussed at a good bit of length at that time. And then, of course, a couple books later, it turns out that the Kane book's all about that. One moment right there. So I think it was a big deal at the time.
Yeah, that's a good one. I remember a lot of even conjecture on forums and stuff going back and forth about like that little passage going, oh God, who could it refer to? And then it's like, oh, we don't know. It could be a male or it could be a female. Maybe it's Marathi. Maybe it's Malekith. Who else could it be? And then a lot of people saying, oh, well, Malekith's not technically his uncle and blah, blah, blah. So it certainly stirred a lot of conversation. So yeah, that's a good one.
I think a lot of people didn't want to believe that uncle would be Malekith, and they were trying to find, looking back upon their High Elf Army books, to find out what the lineage of Teclis and Tyrion was and who else uncle could be.
Yeah, I love the idea of a bunch of people going back and looking up elf genealogy just to try and figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
Hitting that Ancestry.com, looking for one of those green leaves. Yep.
Yeah. Who is the uncle of Isha?
Oh my God.
You can plug in that on Ancestry.com and see what comes up.
Exactly.
I'm sure you'll find something. All right. So any other thoughts beyond those that you guys wanted to add before I flip the other side of the coin on you?
I think the little jaunt to the Garden of Nurgle, our little D&D adventure where we may have found Van Horseman and we may have found is it Commander Drago or whatever the Grey Knight guy is?
Yeah. The Grey Knight, yeah.
Yeah,
there was a lot of speculation about that. Egrim Van Horseman was the other character that we thought was in there.
Yeah, and then he turned up later in Archaon as well.
Yeah, just to get burned.
Burned
with the fire.
Yeah.
I think it was definitely the Grey Knight. I still stand behind that. I really do.
Yeah, I buy it.
I had heard that from somebody else, and I have not read a lick about Grey Knight history on the 40K side of things to know anything about that, so I know. My first impression when I first read it, to be truthful, was that I thought it might have been some other appearance of Lewin Leoncoeur, to be truthful with you. I thought, oh Jesus, this guy again.
Oh, what's he gonna do? Bleed on someone?
Yeah.
Bleed his golden blood?
Yes, exactly. If I had to pick one more, it would just be, it's kind of a tangentially related thing, not within the text itself, but just the reference that I found in the Harlequins book, like the 40K Harlequins book that directly references back to fantasy and talks about Teclis wandering around in the Black Library and like the book of like secret knowledge coming open and the references to Archaon and the Ronadandra and all that sort of thing. And the thought that is in there amongst the Harlequins that the Ronadandra could be stopped and that more importantly, that Slaanesh could be stopped, right? That the Slaanesh feasting on the souls of the elves could be stopped. That's sort of one of the conceptions in there in the Laughing God's secret tome. And, not to future speculate, but can't help but notice that new chaos symbol doesn't exactly have Slaanesh on the bottom, and old Tyrion went riding out somewhere in that story, so that's for future times, but hey, just saying.
Actually, on that last subject there, I published the Archaon last chapter just earlier today, actually, and Phantom King had a response, and he said, when he was talking about Slaanesh, he says, remember that there was a little bit in there that said that Slaanesh only offered up his weakest of greater demons to be there in that room, in that chamber, in the last of it, because he was having doubts about getting in on the plan to end the world.
Oh,
so Phantom King brought up that, and I thought back to that passage, and I thought, oh yeah, he did. They did actually explain that he sent his weakest.
Huh.
On purpose.
That is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
On purpose, or because he needed them somewhere else because they were fighting somewhere?
Well, I think the wording was that he chose to send his weakest. So that seems like thoughtful intent.
Sure.
There we go.
Yeah, he wanted the elves to live and die so he could keep getting those juicy souls. Plus, if everybody's dead, there's no more pleasure to be had, Like, that's, so I get it. He's the young one. He's the rebel.
That's right. Not doing what mom and dad says, just because
right.
It's mom and dad to say it.
That's right.
All right. Well, let's flip it around and have a little bit of fun with some other stuff. So aside from the all seriousness about how we deeply philosophized, we said a lot of dumb crap as well along the way. We sure did. And so I'm going to pass it to you guys first to tell the viewers out there what you thought was the dumbest or stupidest thing that I did or said throughout this series.
Oh.
And you only get half an hour for this time limit.
On the clock.
Keith, you get to go first on this one. I'll have you fall on the sword first. Ha.
Oh no.
No, there's no vengeance here.
I honestly, I couldn't really. I was trying to think of this, and I couldn't really come up with anything. Although I do find your little taglines underneath your name hilarious every week.
Ooh. Yeah, the one I was most proud of was the far squeaker operator.
Yeah, I enjoyed that one. Yeah, I like that. That was funny. Particularly because wasn't that around the time when we had a lot of troubles with Google Hangouts and stuff as well, and it just wasn't working properly.
I think it was, oddly enough, it was just after that.
Just after, oh yeah.
Far squeaker operator.
You shot it there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was good.
Very nice. I can't think of anything. It's hard for me to remember anything that either of the two of you said that I found to be off base or anything like that. But I will go ahead and I will publicly say that one of my predictions was sadly incorrect right now. The cost of prediction is generally low because no one's ever asked to pay the piper when they make a wrong prediction. But I keep track of my own stuff. And I had really hoped we would see Archaon as, one of my predictions was Archaon was going to become a champion of goodness in the New World. And by all accounts, that is not going to be the case, much to my eternal chagrin. I wanted to see that story happen. I wanted to see Archaon as the ultimate champion of Sigmar, but nope.
I'm so glad it didn't pan out that way. I would have been pretty upset if he had turned into a champion of Sigmar.
Yeah, didn't you at one time suggest that he just was Sigmar?
Yes, that's another good one. Yeah, I've been trying to slide him into the good guy role forever. Yes, that Archaon was Sigmar. Also another one of my predictions. Yes, that was incorrect. I got a lot of misses around Archaon and Sigmar. That's where all my off-base stuff comes from, I guess. Well,
you shoot a lot of bullets out there, and you know, most of them are going to miss. we're all guilty of that.
Yeah, I swing for the fences. That's what it is.
Yeah. Well, I think if I was to look back upon the things that I said, and this is going to kind of tie into how I'm going to throw things under the bus for you, Vince, is whenever I got into referencing stupid pop culture stuff, I always was a little bit shameful afterwards. But the one I remember very, very vividly is when we were talking about Neferata and her little crowd of gaggly vampire girlies,
Mm-hmm.
And I compared her to Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie.
Nice.
That I remember vividly and going, oh, geez, how do we even know about those two girls? Like,
I think it's very appropriate.
Talking about, and I think I caught myself talking about them in the same vein as the Kardashians at some other time later.
There was a Kardashians reference. I do not remember what it was in reference to at this point, but there was some Kardashians talk that happened. Yes, that did occur. It's all right. It makes it relatable. You know, it's okay. And she definitely is the Paris Hilton. I think that's fair. She likes to sit around and gossip and collect rumors and look beautiful and not get her hands dirty. But
right.
She's quite brilliant. And anybody out there who's sitting on their high horse who doesn't think Paris Hilton knows exactly what she's doing, you're out of your minds. Neferata, Paris Hilton, both brilliant manipulators.
Yeah, I guess so. If you can have a career out of not having a job or any, you know, transferable skills,
correct,
and yet you make millions, then I guess, you know, you are the master manipulator.
I would call that brilliance. Yes, you have no marketable skills, no talents, no nothing, and yet you are one of the most famous and wealthy people. Seems like a pretty brilliant mind to me.
Yeah. So similarly, that kind of is along the same vein of the things that I thought were silly things that came out of your mouth, is when you would do varying references to people like Taylor Swift.
Mm-hmm. Sure, absolutely. I like a good pop culture reference. Yes, Manfred and his sleeveless bro culture, absolutely. You can't tell me that Manfred wouldn't be on the shore yelling at wet girls from the porch, talking about how he's got a hot tub. That is exactly what he would do in his off time.
Yeah. Yeah. The other great thing from just a couple of episodes back that I remember as well that I thought was great, not really a pop culture thing, but I also thought was really hilarious, was when we were talking about the Incarnates and their last final push at the end and how it looked like they were going to come through. And you went off on some kind of nonsense about the 10th frame of a bowling match and comparing this epic event to like Friday nights at the bowling alley.
Mm-hmm. Hey, a perfect game that's a once in a lifetime event. Come on now. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I just thought, way to bring it on down and make it all meaningless. Which in the end, it was all meaningless, their efforts, but aside from that, it was quite fun. Good. And as far as Keith goes, I got some comment about Keith. One thing that I absolutely loved, and it was, let's remember that Keith came on with us not through Nagash books, but with Glotkin. And I somehow convinced the guy early on to do an in-character reading of Festus and his little Nurgling pals. And I thought, damn, you just nailed that one. It was so good. Sounded hilarious. So
got into the character's head. That's why he's the guy again who I fight with most, you know? Method acting at that point.
Totally method, yes. You didn't shower for 3 days before you read it, just to really go method and get in character.
True. I work in a lab every day, so it wasn't that hard to get in.
Yeah. I don't know if you people out there in the world knew this, but but Keith is actually closer to Dr. Festus than you think.
That is a frightening piece of inside baseball right there.
There you go, folks.
Do you want to share it? Do you want to share any of your experiments with people?
No, we'll let the people figure that out for themselves. Write your own stories, kids.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, fair enough. So how about you, Keith? What are your thoughts now that I've stolen the great moment of you impersonating Dr. Festus? Can you think back on anything that you thought, oh, geez, I shouldn't have said that, or that was really dumb?
I don't regret the Festus thing. Well, let's clear that up right away. That was
Absolutely not. To our viewers, if you want good entertainment, go back and watch book 2. I mean, Keith, you're holding that show together, my friend. So yeah, 100% support for that.
Well, thanks.
All right.
Yeah, I've probably mispronounced a ton of German names really poorly when we were hanging around in the Empire for a while, and French names as well when we're talking about Bretonia. General pronunciations of things that aren't English.
Yeah, there was.
So I apologize to people who
things
do
are
that
tough
better
to
than I can.
Yeah, your German was not so good.
Yeah, it's a little.
My German was probably not so good either. Vince's Southland speak when he was trying to pronounce the city names of the Lizardmen. Oh boy.
That's atrocious. Atrocious. That was basically a war crime. I mean, like, I should probably be dragged to The Hague. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, we all stumbled over elven names as well, because, they all sound the same.
Yeah. Actually, so speaking about the Lizardman names, I don't know if you've seen it yet, Kieran, but this weekend we have a tournament coming up, and Kieran is the TO. And one way in which you can get extra bonus points is if you name all of your characters and regiments. And I'll be playing Lizardmen, and there's a bunch of impronounceable crap on that piece of paper. So have fun with that.
Are there any vowels in their names at all?
Yes, because some of them have names like Colonel Flanders and Leroy Jenkins, but other ones don't. And there's a lot of apostrophes. There are quite a few compound words.
Yeah,
so,
good.
Yeah.
Look forward to that.
Yeah, enjoy.
All right. Well, so let's kind of turn it to a bit of a wrap up here, and have an opportunity to talk about the package as a whole. So the whole volume of 5 books, and you can talk about this from a writing perspective, or from a direction perspective, or from a storytelling angle. Give us a sum up of your thoughts, Keith. I know we touched on this just before we kicked off a little bit, so give us your overarching thoughts about this 5-book series.
All right. So.
Ooh.
Oh, we may have lost him.
That was a timely loss.
Yes, indeed.
So Keith has nothing to say about that. Then is what I can read into that. Vince, can I spring that one on you?
Yeah, sure. So overarching thoughts on the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I touched on it a little at the beginning, but certainly I really like this story. And I don't envy any of the writers who did it. It's an almost insurmountable task to have to touch so many characters and nations and peoples and still fit in these big battles and make everything compelling, right? And to have so little space to do it, really, when you think about it. I mean, if you look at, like, Game of Thrones, yeah, there's a lot of characters, but how many words is that guy burning per book, right? And he's got a bajillion books to do it, right? This is collapsing the whole Wheel of Time into 5 short summations and still needing it to be compelling. So overall, I really liked it. I thought it was great, and I would highly recommend anybody who has watched us but maybe hasn't read the books to go back and give some of them a read. And if you want to gloss over some of the battle stuff, yeah, you're probably fine to do that. You don't need to give those as much attention of just like units pushing back and forth and shoving on each other. But there's a lot of really brilliant moments in there of good characters in every single book. The interplay between the interplay between Archon and Manfred in the first book, right? And the way that those two sort of struggle against each other. The moments in the final battle with Cetra and Prince Apophos and the Destroyer of Eternities, and the little Skaven waking up Apophos to go assassinate Nagash, right? And it just goes on and on. Like, every single one of these books has some moments in them that I look back on and I'm like, wow, that was a really cool moment. And I mean, the reality is, how many movies do you watch in a year that you don't even remember or think about or have any great moments to talk about from, right? Like, yeah, a lot, right? How many movies do you watch that are just completely forgettable, really? You're like, yeah, that was cool. And then it's whatever, it's cotton candy. It's gone a minute later.
Right. Yeah. Loads, of course.
Right. But this, I mean, I really, like, I'm sure I could bore our listeners for another hour just recounting really memorable moments. Some are small, some are big, some are narratively fairly, irrelevant, but just rule of cool. And some were huge and impactful. So I think that there's just so much goodness in a really tight form here amongst these books. And again, like I said at the beginning, I mean, we should all, I see sometimes people not like these stories, or they don't like how it ended, or they feel like Games Workshop broke their world or ruined their world. That's crazy to me. This is a story, and you got a great ending to it. I mean, I want my world to be a compelling, amazing story, and stories have ends. And what an end this was, right? I mean, I am not sure that within my lifetime, any other game or product like this that I love and care about will ever see anything similar to this on this scope and magnitude. Like, this is very literally probably a once-in-a-lifetime event, right?
Yeah, I got to agree with you. I think that the way that I described it to other folks in the past is comparing what Games Workshop is doing here with the end times, similar to what the DC and Marvel comic world have done in the past. Like, they've blown up their world and hit the reset button and started all over again. But they had absolutely universe-spanning apocalyptic events happening within there. To put so much history of years and years, like those comic book guys did, is the only thing that's comparable to the amount of years of history that have built up here to the Warhammer world for them to try to sum up into even 5 volumes, as you said. It's a difficult task, and what became apparent, and when you're reading this thing, and again, I do want to reiterate, just like you did, that folks should go back and read it. It's worth your time. I certainly didn't feel that it wasn't worth my time, even though I'll admit there were some draggy moments, and they repeated some of the same mechanisms throughout it. But there's still political intrigue in this story. There is still action in this story, and there is a couple of moments of love interest for those romantics in you that want to find that. And not just boy-girl romanticism, but a little bit of bromance as well that goes on in there. So it's got elements of a good story, but if there's any knock that I have against it, it's that it was clearly written by a team of people rather than one person. And sometimes that doesn't always mesh and jive and go seamlessly. But if you can bear that in mind, I think that you'll enjoy a lot of the elements of this series of 5 books. So, Keith, are you back with us now? Active and functioning? Maybe Keith's having some. Keith's far squeaker has gone and buggered off on him for the most part.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm on far squeaker number 3 right now.
Wow.
Tonight. Yeah. Oh yeah. I've gone through a desktop, a laptop, and now I'm on an iPad. So.
Okay. Well, yeah. The floor is yours to give us your overall final wrap-up impressions of the End Time Saga. Then.
All right then. Okay. Thank you. So I'll start off. I'll finish a good note. I'll finish on a great note, but I'll start off maybe a little lower. So the books themselves, at times they dragged for me. Chapters were huge. Blah 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 blah. Basically, if I was to recommend this to a friend, even if they really enjoyed fantasy, unless they were already invested in the Warhammer world, I probably wouldn't suggest it to them, because we all went into this with preconceived ideas of what it's going to be. We already had characters we loved, characters we hated. There was a whole bunch of history with this. So as far as the writing goes, I'd give it a solid C. But as far as the story goes and everything that happened and the whole idea of the end times, it's an A++, hands down. I mean, you had heroes we loved rise and fall. Nagash came back from the dead. Archaon finally got to realize his plans. Sigmar was the vortex was unraveled. Continents were destroyed. It was amazing. And like you guys were saying with the D&D or the DC and the Marvel universes, it completely allows a reboot now. I mean, in terms of where the company can go with it and stuff like that, the end times are fantastic. It allows them carte blanche. They can do whatever the hell they want now, and that's exciting. And I know it can be a little bit scary. They might remove your favorite units, or they might change the look of things, but it's something to embrace, I think, rather than fear. So overall, I think the End Times was a fantastic ride. It was a roller coaster of emotion. Stuff happened, and you were sad, you were shocked, you were scared, and you were happy, I think, in the end. And at the end was a great ending. It didn't leave me feeling without a sense of closure. I did get a sense of closure, and it left me wanting more. And sure, there was little bits where, hey, what happened to Skarsnik? He got a crown and a giant bomb part. I'd love to know what happened to him. But I'm sure a lot of that gets covered in the alternative novels and things like that. So yeah, overall, it's just been an absolutely stellar read. And yeah, great. 2 thumbs up.
Good. Okay. Well, that's actually the way you stated it right there. Actually, is a pretty good segue to how I wanted to kind of wrap up the show. But let me precursor it with this. We are right now on the cusp of the release of the Age of Sigmar, of course. Anybody who is remotely familiar with Warhammer knows this. It's going to happen this weekend, 2 days from now, that it's released to the world in a general whole. There has been leaks on the internet about what the rules are about, and that's generally what the chatter is, but there's also been some leaks about what the storyline is in general. But I've honestly stayed away from that a little bit for the sake of this last question that I want to pose to you two guys. And maybe while you're live here, Keith, and moving, I'll put it to you first. What does the Warhammer world look like when it resumes?
Oh, that's a question. So I haven't actually been keeping up with a ton of the rumors for Age of Sigmar, so this could be totally on point, or it could be way off base. So we'll see.
That's good. If it is, it's totally raw. That's what the people want.
Sure. So I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be like the little pockets of reality that have kind of been talked about before. So you had the Lizardmen have kind of escaped, and I think they're gonna seed new planets or establish new worlds in certain places. I wouldn't surprise me if they stay in exile and start looking for the old ones, and they come upon another world very similar to the old Warhammer world, in which the old ones have already started, moving towards their great plan. The Chaos Gods, they're not done yet. I mean, they've turned away from that one world, that one game, but there's plenty more where that came from. Of course, we saw at the very, very end of Archaon that one kind of soul holding on to the cold embers of a dying world or a new world, and then starts breathing life into it. So I think, we're going to get another world. I think now that the vortex has been unraveled and that they're essentially demigods walking around the place, they could reshape the worlds in their own image. So we could have, the Wind of Fire creating a fire world full of volcanoes and rivers of lava, and then you've got Sigmar, who has, a roiling world of lightning and celestial beings and things like that. So that's actually kind of what I'd like to see as well. I really liked the Winds of Magic, the 8 Winds of Magic type aspect of the worlds. I think the races will all exist in some way, shape, or form. And yeah, everyone will start butting heads again.
as they always do.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, now I'm going to turn this to you now, Vince, because I know that you are with your Warhammer Weekly show that you do.
Yes.
Part of your shtick is to, of course, keep up on these rumors, and you might be more well read than the both of us. Certainly are. So I'm gonna not answer this question. I'm just gonna let you tell the people how it's actually gonna be.
All right. So you want me to spoil everything I know? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, if you want to tell these people exactly what the Warhammer world looks like after it resumes.
All right.
I mean, they're gonna find out in a couple of days. They can read it for themselves. You may as well tell them here.
All right. So it was Sigmar floating through the void, and what he grasped was the Sigmarite core of the world, like literally the core of the world. And he was floating through space for a long time, and eventually he comes upon this great dragon, like this universe dragon named Dracolith. And Dracolith reveals to him the secrets of like world creation and these sorts of things. And Sigmar starts reshaping stuff and leads to the Age of Myth. And in the Age of Myth, Sigmar, the 8 winds of magic form into actual solid realms with an incarnate sort of steering their path. So, like, Nagash forms a realm of death, and Alariel forms a realm of life, and Grimgor, not Grimgor, I don't remember who said, like, beasts and all these things. And, yeah, it was Grimgor, I think. It's still around, actually. Yeah, I think he's still around. And everybody comes back. You know, like if you don't get drawn and quartered and turned to dust and your soul exploded, you're still alive in the Warhammer world. And so they have an alliance for a long time. And in the Age of Myth, Sigmar is the chief god amongst all these gods who rule these realms of the incarnates. And millennia of peace evolve. New civilizations rise, and well, everything's super awesome. Okay, it's like the Lego movie. Everything is awesome. But eventually, Chaos notices this, and I'm not sure if this is actually the thing that trips them off or not, but Tyrion gets it, who is still alive, gets it in his head that he sees Slaanesh is in a moment of weakness and rides out, takes his entire force, like so the God of Light takes this entire force of light and pierces into the heart of Slaanesh's realm, and either kills or captures him or something. Like that's still a mystery. I mean, I haven't read in the book. I don't think even in the book they reveal it. But he is successful to some degree in this, but it severs and begins to break up the alliance of the great incarnates, these gods. And Nagash basically tires of this and decides he wants his own he's got his own path. He leaves the beasts and the sort of forces of destruction, and that is to say not chaos, destruction. Like, why ain't you fighting people who want to just punch people and get in a punch up? So like the orcs and the ogres and those kind of things, they leave and go off on their own. By the way, for this entire time, no one knows where the lizardmen are. Like, they are AWOL this whole time, to be very clear. Like, and this is millennia going past. So during the entire Age of Myth, they're AWOL.
Okay.
And so then we come to, there's some other stuff that happens, but basically Chaos rides in and just smashes its way across the realms. Like, Chaos reconquers everything in like an incredibly short span. And the only realm that survives is Aesir, the realm of heaven, where Sigmar shuts the gates and basically just blocks off the realm of heaven from Chaos. And so the Sad King sits on his throne and is like, his allies are dead or trapped or suffering or enslaved. And in his moment of desperation, he sort of turns his eye back to the old world, and within it sees like this kernel of an idea in that world that he had lost. And he sees that this is sort of his moment, that this will not happen again. And he kind of rallies up his forces. And when we pick up in the reason is the Age of Sigmar, and the reason that age has dawned is because Sigmar has now rode out and is using the lightning bridge power we saw him use in Archaon, where he learned you can teleport with lightning.
Yeah.
He's using that to bridge dimensions now and across the mortal realms. And he is on the offensive against Chaos. And so the box set is actually portraying the first strike in this war that is playing out over the first narrative. And this is about the time when the Lizardmen show back up, because in these early wars with Chaos, like there's an initial battle that's going very poorly for the Stormguard and for Sigmar's chosen troops. And out of nowhere, like, bam, all these weird lizard things teleport in that have not been seen forever and just start wrecking face. Like, they just beat the snot out of Chaos. Like, they move, they're just like, they're brilliant and they're tactical and they're clearly led by like an utter genius intelligence as they just disassemble Chaos. And before they can be questioned, they just teleport back away. And so they get the name the Seraphon, and they get, that's not like their own name, I don't think. I think that's what's given to them. But they just show up as these sort of like weird avenging forces that come in sort of the darkest hour and have an unending thirst to make Chaos pay. And so yeah, that's a lot of stuff. But there you go. I think that's a pretty good
exciting times.
There's more, but I won't keep going.
Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty good carryover though, and a good tale to leave our folks with. Well, fellas, I think I want to sum this up by saying, first off, thanks to the both of you for dedicating as much as you did into this series that we went through. Again, we did 25 episodes and over 30 hours of action throughout this thing, and I enjoyed it all. I really did. My hope for this is that over the next months and maybe even longer, this becomes something that people can, revisit a little bit. I think it provides a little bit of a good background if you're hobbying and you're doing some painting, much like a podcast that you might listen to while you're getting your hobby on. And if you listen to it through a few times, hopefully that there's a lot of good stuff that'll come out of it, and you'll have some formulated thoughts of your own as you watch it again. So, do you guys want to add anything to that to the viewers, or say anything directly to them before we close it out?
It's been a good ride, and I hope you guys have enjoyed watching.
It has been an absolute pleasure and honor to do this with both of you gentlemen. It has been unbelievable fun.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of it, of what we've accomplished here as a group. And I will say this just as a mild teaser: if maybe the Age of Sigmar has nice little stories to go over, they might be worth philosophizing about as well. Maybe think about that. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, farewell, Warhammer world. You've been good to us. And farewell to you two guys.
Bye-bye.
Good night.